A recent data mining leak just confirmed that Call of Duty has skill-based damage in its coding. Is this an innocent method of making the player experience better? Or is it a strategic attack on the community aimed at undermining arguments and continuing Activision's gaslighting of the community? Welcome to Spike Beat Gaming, where today we're going to be looking at the history of the Disney Frozen Google search cover-up conspiracy and how it could shed light on what Activision is currently doing with the Call of Duty franchise. First things first, I want to thank Drifter for his coverage of this leak, as it was what originally got my head spinning on this topic. To recap what was found, there is coding in the Call of Duty files which points to the ability to scale the damage between players and bots based on a player's skill level. There appears to be several different brackets for this function, but how much information we get from the few lines of code is mostly just based on the naming they chose for it. We can't see how it actually works in practice or how to manipulate it, so we have very little to go on. However, it seems strange to me that Activision would name the function something they have been actively denying exists without a purpose. Now, what might that purpose be? To answer that, I want to first break down the conspiracy around what happened to Disney's frozen head. There have long been rumors of what happened to Walt Disney, the founder of the Disney Corporation, after he died. Rumors have suggested that he had his head cryogenically frozen so that he could be brought back in the future once the technology was good enough to revive him. His head is rumored to have been hidden in a few different places, everywhere from under the Pirates of the Caribbean ride to under Cinderella's castle, and a few other places, all with really no credible sources to back it. His family have always claimed that none of this is true, that he was cremated, and wouldn't have even thought about cryogenically freezing his head. And all things considered, I find that this is probably a little far-fetched, when I can't even trust my freezer to keep my ice cream safe at this point. Now, I'm not Disney levels of rich, so maybe, but this seems like a lot of hope to be putting into technology to bring you back, especially when we consider that Disney died from lung cancer, which is still the leading cause of death amongst cancer patients. So, a little far-fetched, a little bit out there. Now, the conspiracy comes from a group who have claimed that the reason Disney came out with their hit movie and musical Frozen was to keep people from finding the truth about Disney's frozen head. Now, I'm going to defend a billion-dollar corporation here. I don't always do this, but let's consider billion-dollar company. When all it takes to get around all of the work they did to cover this up is, instead of just typing in Disney Frozen, you have to type in Disney's frozen head or frozen body. One word added onto the search, that doesn't really seem like a very good cover-up if this is something that you think needs to be covered up so much that you build a giant multi-million-dollar movie off of it. But that's just me. Now, how does this relate to the Call of Duty franchise and what Activision is doing? Well, when we look at it, Activision is using naming that is very clearly from the community. We have been talking about skill-based damage for years, and Activision has been actively denying it. Now, why might Activision be doing this? Well, that's a little bit clearer from our perspective looking in versus Disney's. If we're looking at the Disney situation, why might they want to cover up the Disney frozen head conspiracy? Well, likely because how many kids were typing in Disney Frozen looking for who knows what, and all of a sudden there's just a head of Walt Disney in a glass container. Probably we didn't want children to be traumatized by that. Now, what I don't want Disney to find out about is the Haunted Mansion ride, where there are at least half a dozen different headless characters, or characters in particular who are headless, whose heads are in glass jars. Don't know. I don't want them to try to cover up that ride. It's a great one and it's a lot of fun, especially during Christmas when it's made over for The Nightmare Before Christmas. So, when we're looking at Activision, what they're doing, I think there's two different paths that we could take. We can take the path of, this is just a legitimate thing that they are doing to help the player base. the altruistic, the noble cause of making the game more fun for more players. I think everyone could be on board for that. I really want that to be the case. However, my issue arises with the fact that really Activision has done a really poor job of being that company, of making sure that it is something where we can trust them in this case. I think the nefarious answer is also slightly more fun to work through as we are going into it. So, to recap, all it does, in theory, and I think that Activision is going to come out with a statement here in the next week or two, since the code leaked, saying that the community has been talking about skill-based damage. They don't know what it does. This is what it does. All it does is in the casual mode, it scales the damage that the bots do to players in order to make the experience better so that they don't have to adjust the skill, the accuracy level of the bots, that they can just adjust the damage that they do, because those two things will work together to create an easier experience for the players. That's all it does. That it will never be used player to player. That's the best case scenario. The worst case scenario is, let's assume that they could do it, that they could take and scale the damage between players. Logically, this probably wouldn't make sense in a environment where you've got a group of players, where you're in duos, trios, or quads in Warzone, because amongst a team, there's usually a high level of variance in the skill level. That is, the best player on the team and the worst player on the team within a team are probably as diverse as the majority of the lobby. If I'm the worst player on the team and my gun is doing 100% damage and the best player on the team is doing 80% damage, that's not going to matter to a player who, typically speaking in quads, multiple teammates are shooting at the same person at the same time. It doesn't matter to that player how our damage was scaled if they got 5 times the lethal damage done before they even realized that they stepped into the wrong window. So when we look at the bigger teams where you've got multiple players on a single team, probably not going to see it there. Where you're likely going to see it is you're going to see it in solos, where individual players are fighting against each other. It does now make a difference when my weapon does 100% damage versus 80. Now, caveat here, this all relies on the fact that Activision servers can even handle something this big, which I'm not convinced they can, but for a moment, let's pretend like they could handle it. It seems weird to me that the only mode that I think it's logical that they would have this skill-based damage in is the one mode that they removed. And they replaced it with casual mode, where now you went from 150 players playing to now you've only got, I think, 28 players playing at a time. So you reduce the amount of players drastically, which would be a way of reducing the load on servers. Which, once again, the servers are already buggy and old and laggy enough, but maybe this equation that's running all the time, dictating how much damage you do to an enemy player, maybe it's running all the time and that's what makes it so laggy and buggy. But now, with the casual mode, we reduced it. Now there's only 27 other players that you need to have this calculation going for of how much damage you should be doing. And it seems like the bots are spawned in for particular players as you're playing through the game. So it would make sense then that with each bot being spawned in for a particular player, that's a pretty easy calculation. And if someone else runs into your bot, does it really matter if it's a slightly better or slightly worse bot than they're expecting? That's not nearly as important as if I go up into a gunfight and I have terrible accuracy and my weapon is now doing 80%, that's going to be a lot more noticeable than the bot in particular. So, with that said though, let's consider, do we think Activision would actually spend the time and money to develop this and to put it into the game? Especially when we consider that the majority of their time and effort is going into selling bundles, because that's how they are making a lot of money. Would they waste the time on coming up with a really elaborate way to make each individual gunfight balanced the way that they think when they're just selling bundles? Now, argument could be made, well, people enjoy playing the game more, they're going to spend more money on bundles. There's an argument there to be made. But I think we have to look again at the servers. These servers are years outdated. They need to update to a better server, which, in all likelihood, if they were doing this, a better server would have let them do it more efficiently. Maybe they could do it with the standard game mode, where you have 150 players and you can have this damage balancing going on. I think that the issue that comes up with damage-based adjustments is it would be really easy to prove. You could just watch your gameplay back and tell if it's happening. Now, in reality, how many players are actually ever watching back their gameplay? Which, if you're not, you should totally do that. It's a really good way to learn and develop your skills. But anyone could watch it and see, whereas other things would be way easier to adjust. They could adjust your recoil really easily. Hey, this is a high skill player. They go up in a gunfight against someone who's not as skilled. Just bump up the recoil by 5%. All of a sudden, now you've made it a harder battle. They're probably going to miss more shots. And how many players are going to be able to go in and show definitively, in this one case, that their recoil pattern was different than it usually is? That's a much harder thing to prove, and would probably be a lot easier to adjust because of that, because it would be so hard to prove. Now, this has all been fun to kind of play around with, and in the long run, for the conspiratorial side, I want it to be true that they're doing these adjustments. In reality, I don't think that they are, because I think on a tech side, they wouldn't be able to do it successfully. But let me know what you think down in the comments below. If you like the video, please click that like button, hit the subscribe. I would greatly appreciate your support, and make sure to watch some of the other videos. Let me know if there's anything you would like me to cover. If you're liking the Warzone stuff more, if you like the zombies, if you like the mixture, I might try branching out, playing a few other games, just because I'm starting to get into the middle of summer, so my desire to try different things is out there a little bit more, but we'll see. As always, remember, have a good one.